Hi, I'm Ronald, and I discuss parts of the Bible, and I'm continuing in the book of Genesis, continuing from chapter 45. So we begin in chapter 45, 1-3. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph told his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. His great emotion showed that Joseph did not cruelly manipulate his brothers. God directed him to make these arrangements, and it hurt him to do so. Now, because of the punishment they anticipated, the great emotion of Joseph, his manner of revelation, and the total shock of learning that Joseph was alive and right there in front of them, the brothers were dismayed. Now, the Hebrew word for dismayed, bahal, means amazed, frightened, or even terrified. Their dismay was a preview, a prophecy of what will happen when the Jewish people again see Jesus and see him for who he is. "And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me, whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn." Zechariah 12:11. Verse 4-8 continues with Joseph's testimony. "And Joseph said to his brothers, 'Please come near me.' So they came near, and then he said, 'I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father of Pharaoh, and lord over all his house, and a ruler throughout the land of Egypt.'" Now Joseph honestly stated their sin many years before. Yet in compassion, Joseph did not want them to be grieved or angry with themselves. Joseph was past his grief and anger and wanted his brothers to also be past it. Now Joseph did not diminish what the brothers did, whom you sold into Egypt. Yet he saw that God's purpose in it was all greater than the evil of the brothers. So Joseph leans on the sovereignty of God to put their regret to death, freeing everyone with the reminder that their sins haven't derailed God's plans or his promises. Now, when we are sinned against, we are tempted to fall into one or both of those areas. We're tempted to pretend that the offending party never did it, or we're tempted to ignore the overarching hand of God in every circumstance. Is it fair to ask, why was Joseph in Egypt? Was it because of the sin of his brothers, or because of the good plan of God? Now, the answer is that both aspects were true. All Joseph's sorrows were for a purpose. God used them to preserve his family and to provide the conditions for it to become a nation. Now, Joseph was a victim of men, but God turned it around for his glory. None of it was for a loss. Then in verses 9-15, Joseph tells his brothers to go home and bring their father and find protection from the famine. Now, this was the message Joseph wanted his brothers to bring to their father. And when Jacob eventually heard it, it was one of the greatest days of his life. He had the joy of learning that his favorite son, who would save his brethren, who was given up for dead, is now alive. Now, Joseph was affectionate and loving to all his brothers. Joseph didn't exclude those who had been especially cruel to him. His heart was open to his brothers as a group and as individuals. Now Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh. He gave them provisions for the journey. The sons of Israel received transportation, provisions, garments, and riches because of who their favored brother was. Pharaoh blessed the sons of Jacob for Joseph's sake. Verse 26 says that Jacob did not believe them when they told him Joseph was alive. He didn't believe them. Jacob was told Joseph was dead, and he believed it. Then he was told that Joseph was alive, and he did not believe it until his sons told him the words of Joseph and showed him the blessings that came to them through Joseph. Then he believed Joseph was alive, though he had not yet seen him. By analogy, we could say that the only way people will know Jesus is alive is by telling them his words and showing them his blessings in our lives. Now, knowing the favored son was alive, back from the dead, as it were, changed Israel's testimony from all these things are against me, Genesis 42:36, to it is enough. 46:1-4. So Israel took his journey with all that he had, came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifice to the God of his father, Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there, and I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. Now Jacob left nothing behind and came to the southernmost outpost of Canaan on the way to Egypt. Israel stopped there to honor God with sacrifices. Abraham in Genesis 22:19 and Isaac in Genesis 26:23 lived for a time at Beersheba. Israel's grandfather, Abraham, planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba many years before and had called on the name of the Lord there. Isaac received special promises from God. He built an altar for sacrificing there, calling on the name of the Lord. It was probably this very place where Israel sacrificed, remembering what God had done before. So God promises that his presence will go with Jacob, and he promises to make him into a great nation while they're in Egypt, the land of their enemies. Now they started as 70 people, but it won't stay that way long. 46:5-27 lists all who went to Egypt, and Joseph instructs them on what to say when meeting Pharaoh. He wants to ensure that they have access to the land of Goshen, which is fertile, and so that they can feed their animals. Now, Joseph knew the best way to do that was to let Pharaoh see that they're shepherds, especially because Egyptians have a unique disdain for shepherds. And Goshen, which is a little further out, would be a good place to keep those Hebrew shepherds at arm's length, so to speak. Verse 28-30, then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him, fell on his neck, and wept on his neck for a good while. And Israel said to Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive. Now he sent Judah before him to show Joseph, to point him the way. It was fitting for Judah, if of the Messianic line, to do this. Now he demonstrated the true spirit of repentance and the change of heart among Joseph's brothers. 47:1-4, Joseph told Pharaoh, saying, My father and my brothers and their flocks, their herds, and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. Indeed, they are in the land of Goshen. So he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, What is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, Your servants are shepherds, both us and our fathers. And they said to Pharaoh, We have come to dwell in the land because your servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Therefore, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Now, when Joseph spoke those words to Pharaoh, it was the fulfillment of both God's plan and Joseph's desire. Joseph was again with his father and brothers and all their families. This blessing was all because of Joseph. He saved Egypt and much of the world from terrible famine. And now the whole family of Israel was blessed and received an inheritance because of Joseph. Jacob blessed Pharaoh and explained that he was on a pilgrimage, and he knew that his real home was somewhere else, heaven. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Now, this was not a cynical statement by Jacob. He recognized that the general character of his life lived in the flesh, and the length of his life did not compare to eternity or the lives of his ancestors. Pharaoh acknowledged Jacob was a man of God by accepting his blessing. In the Egyptian religion, Pharaoh himself was thought to be a god. They considered Pharaoh the human embodiment of Ra, the sun god. This means that it was a remarkable thing that he allowed Israel to bless him. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you all, and I'll see you next time.